Here we go. All right. It is 10 a.m. So I'll keep letting people in, but we are gonna get started. So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this month's ORO session. It will be covering exploring the new HRP 503 protocol template. And our speaker today is Zachary Chakan, IRB administrator. This session obviously is being recorded, and we will post the recording onto our YouTube within the next week or so. For questions, if you have any questions, you can either raise your hand or put them in the chat. Zach does have a lot to get through, so if we see that the questions are kind of taking up some of the time, I'm going to ask you to push them to the end. But for right now, you can just raise your hand as we're going along. And with that, Zach, you can get started.
Thanks, Michelle, and thank you, Alexis. Good morning, everybody. I'm Zach Chakan. I see some familiar faces and names showing up, so I'm glad you all showed up to register and learn about the new protocol, which I'm sure everyone was so incredibly excited to hear about. Something that has been uh, the protocol is such an essential document to your IRB submission, and it's pretty much looked the same for a very long time. So change is always difficult. Change can be both good and bad, but we're hoping that as time grows and with some explanations that are going on here today, that I'll try to explain the best that I can, that it will ease those transitions and make it completing the protocol a bit easier for you and make it more familiar, and having this presentation that you can always refer back to if you'd like as well. And just so you know, too, I have my contact information at the end of this presentations, and I'm always welcome for feedback about any questions, any concerns, any issues that you have, to try to help rectify those. So today's topics with the new 503 protocol template will cover why we changed this document after it's been pretty much the same for over 10 years since Click started back in, I believe, November of 2015. Showcase a few of the major differences between the old template and the new template. It's sort of a big difference, a big important thing that there was a lot of feedback from years and years was having an exempt or not human subjects research protocol. So being able to request those determinations sort of by submitting your protocol in a particular manner. Some new section highlights, I should say, because there's been so many changes throughout the course of the document. It's impossible to get through them all in just this session, although I may want to try to make it as easy as possible for everyone here. But I just wanted to highlight a few particular sections that are going to be really important to note. And there's new supplemental documents as part of the overall protocol, which I'll explain in further detail later. So just a real quick back to basics moment as to what is the HRP 503 protocol. So really, if you've ever submitted into Click, done a study submission to the Institutional Review Board, the IRB, you would have had to include most likely some version of the 503 protocol. Because really what the protocol document it's for years we've sort of called it the blueprint to your study. Uh, Sometimes we have said, someone should be able to look at your protocol and with as much knowledge as they have, at least be able to sort of recreate parts of the study as they can. Because otherwise, how will we be able to know what the accurate determination of the site would be? Is it greater than minimal risk? Is it not greater than minimal risk? What are the vulnerable populations involved? What's the consent process like? So that's why we're very careful with the protocol and why we always ask so many questions about it and why it just involves so much detail and has always been a very long and very thorough document. And so it doesn't matter if you have a drug or device study, a social behavioral study, a simple survey study, or a study with a different external IRB, or I'm sorry, that you are maybe a multi-site study where we are the relying IRB for multiple uh, study sites. The 503 document is pretty much the cog of your entire submission. And it's really supposed to paint a comprehensive picture of your entire study because we need to know all these particular details and all the information about your study so that we can make an accurate determination about what research category and what regulatory criteria are needed for your study to fall into. So why change the document when it's been this way for over 10 years? It's really been, as far as I know, I joined the UBIRB in September of 2016, and the protocol pretty much looked the same the entire time that I've been here. But other than maybe one section change here, some words there, some formatting changes there, it's mostly looked the same. But one big detail is that fairly often it was easy, if you everyone remembers how almost everything was full of text boxes. And there were section numbers, and the way that it was formatted, too many times, sometimes we would get complaints about it being hard to read or hard to follow, or sometimes researchers would type things in and accidentally renumber the sections because of the formatting, and it would be difficult to sort of say, hey, where is this section? So we wanted a little bit of a cleaner looking and maybe a more modern looking document to be easier. And with the potential idea of maybe growing this into there being some sort of online form, which is also potentially in the works in the future as well for the protocol. Some other feedback that we've gotten is that it's too long, it's difficult to complete, it's very time consuming, there's a whole lot of sections that are unnecessary. So we wanted to make something that was more efficient in the long run for researchers and theoretically also make it easier for the IRB and reviewers such as myself to review along the way too. Which is part of the last point here too, is that some of the questions throughout the document, they would be too open-ended, too vague. And there would certainly be a lot of places where you would feel like 75, 90% of submissions that came in, we would need to ask revisions to a certain question or a certain section. And that's just not efficient for anybody if the questions aren't getting the answers that we need. So it just has more time in the back and forth process before your even study gets approved in the first place. So it took us quite a long time. We had been sort of working on this for about 2 years to develop the new template. We had a lot of ideas ourselves, but we also reached out to the research community here at UB. We did have a focus group made up of principal investigators, research coordinators, IRB board members, some other administrators throughout the VPR's office to try to, as we were developing this with one of our initial drafts, how are we on the right track? Are we asking the right questions? Because so often we know what we need as an IRB, but it's not exactly clear to the researcher side. So we could be wording things in a way that only makes sense to us, as opposed to on the researcher side. So we wanted to do the best job that we could to formulate a new protocol that sort of spoke to everyone and would make it more efficient for everybody. And as part of this, those of you who are on the sort of the biomedical side of the research coin, we did create a new protocol template as well, sort of a side one that's only a very specialized version for retrospective medical chart reviews only. It's called the 503R. That's also available. And that was sort of our pet project because a lot of the formatting and design started in that version. So if you have filled that out and you've seen that, the new version at least looks formatting wise and design wise a lot similar to that one. Um, and with that protocol, we it helped us to shape overall the new protocol template, and also that's gonna help us in revising the 503R because we may have it sort of advancements to that as well to maybe expand upon that in the near future as well. So a couple of the major differences between the protocol templates. The first one, if you've filled any of them out yet, should be pretty obvious. The design and formatting is vastly different. And as I already mentioned, we're hoping to eliminate the sections getting accidentally renumbered, and so that maybe with one study the section is number 7 and somebody else at 6. We want to try to avoid that wherever we can, and we hope that the new version will fix that. One thing that is definitely hopefully to make it more efficient as well is that there are a lot more check boxes to complete answers, and less text boxes. So that way, a lot of times there could be places before where the answer would simply be not applicable or yes or no, but there would just be a text box for that there. Where now in order to make it a little more visually appealing, there's text boxes only where necessary, where we need that information to fill in. And if there really could just be a yes or no answer, you can very quickly and easily check that box and move forward. And that leads to more clear skip patterns as well, so that there could be a section that says section 7.1. If the answer is no, skipped right to 8.0. So if you check no to that, you can immediately, don't worry about how many other subsections there are in section 7. You can go right ahead to 8.0. So we hope that that would be more efficient for researchers as well. And finally, some supplemental documents. I did touch on that a little bit earlier, and it's going to be more of a deal later. But essentially, the key about that is that it takes a lot of the many questions and sections sort of out of the protocol and puts them somewhere separate. So if these details don't apply to your study, you're not wasting time going through all those sections and determining whether or not they apply to your study and wondering what to do there. You don't even get to see those questions. You could just ignore them and move on with the rest of the document. So just to show a few things here, this is a comparison of the like just section 2.0 right after sort of the study summary section here. You could see the first section one was objectives in the old protocol, the old version. There's a question with italics, and there's a text box for where to fill in there. And you've got that later on in section 2 also. Whereas right from the beginning of the new version, you see we highlight the check boxes and only a necessary text box if you choose other for the study elements section. So the font's different. It's a little bit bigger. Hopefully, it's a little bit clearer uh, in order to, again, make it more efficient and easier to read and follow along the way. So notes and guidance. So one thing, the old protocol template definitely had notes, and to try to assist researchers and coordinators when developing their protocol. But there were a lot of things that we have sort of picked up over time about certain questions or certain sections where it isn't exactly always clear what we're looking for, or if maybe there's another document that could be added to the submission that would be required if you answer this question a certain way. So we try to add as many notes, and when I put a note in all capital letters there, because we have it in all capital letters in the protocol, to really highlight places where we felt like it would be a good sort of brief educational session for researchers and coordinators. Sometimes there's links to other websites or to other documents, or there could be prompts with a paperclip that maybe you should upload that you're going to need to upload a document into your click submission if you answer this section a particular way. And you can see an example of this here in section 2.2. So if your study only involves de-identified data analysis, and some of you may know this from us asking about it, that you should upload a HRP-613 certificate of de-identification document to your submission to help certify that there's no identifiers as part of the being collected as part of the study. So, and 2.3 there shows a link to NIH website about FDA regulated research. So those are just a couple of examples where we tried to throw in some little educational tidbits throughout the new protocol, and we may add those more in the future as well, depending on what feedback we get. So here's some examples of the checkboxes and text boxes I was describing earlier. Section 9.0 is study interventions, and you could see that 9.1 here just asks pretty much a yes or no question. Does the study involve a non-drug or device intervention? If the answer is no, you just check the box and you skip, and it will tell you what section to skip ahead to right there. But if the answer is yes, then you check the yes box and then to briefly describe it below. And there's a text box that's you can't really type outside of it within the protocol document. So we feel like that's going to be a lot easier to manage and deal with. as part of filling out the protocol itself. So we really tried as where we could. It's not possible throughout the entire uh, template, if you will, but try to include as many check boxes wherever possible and limit the text boxes so that just so we could have as much specific information as we could as part of this. And really, that the only time that you would have to type something in is if you answer yes to something. So, and as I mentioned, we really want to try to avoid the accidental reformatting and problems with that. So we have not heard any issues or complaints of that to this degree. If you do happen to fill out some the protocol sections and something like that happens, by all means, give us some feedback and let us know, and we can see if there's maybe an error somewhere along the way. But we want to try to avoid formatting errors and readability problems wherever possible. So here's an example too. Same section as I just showed about the skip patterns. So it's stated in section 9.0. If you answer 9.1 no, it says right there skip to 9.2. 9.2, if you answer no, they'll say skip to 10.0. So pretty much in most cases, if the answer is no in the checkbox where you check that option, there will be directions within the protocol document to tell you where to go next. What section do you need to go to? There are some sections that have many, many subsections in them. And if you answer no, you may be able to skip a whole lot of sections so that you don't have to worry about reading all this information that's really not relevant to your study. And because really, we don't really want to get you bogged down in information that is just going to waste your time and be inefficient as part of the process. And one thing that I would always tell people in the past about when completing protocols, especially if there is a study that is more of a simple study or doesn't have a lot of procedures in it, if the more and more questions you see, you may start to feel like you need to answer every question and you need to put an answer in there because it's what the IRB wants to see or wants to hear. And we want to try to avoid that. We don't want to pigeonhole yourself into completing sections or completing information that really isn't true for your study. And you may end up inadvertently turning your study into something that it's not because you are filling out unnecessary questions. So that is why we really wanted to do the best job that we could in presenting this in the best way and making it clear where to skip and just eliminating unnecessary questions for you. And another big detail is that we did add in a lot of places more specific questions, whereas before there may have been a lot of vague, open-ended questions or questions that would have three, four, five parts to them. And when it came down to it, we would often see that, if there was one section or one, let's say section 10.1, for example, if it has three, four, five parts to it, likely there's a reason for that. We might need to see an answer to each of those sub questions within a question, if you will, in order to help make a determination if something meets exempt versus expedited criteria, or whether the risk level is appropriate, or whether the confidentiality information includes everything that we need to know to make sure that that risk is minimized. But what we would often see is that it would ask this three, four, five questions, or a very vague question, and we get three or four words as a response, or only one part of that question would be answered. So that would be a particular case where we'd go back and forth, sometimes multiple times with coordinators or researchers, and that slows down the process and it slows down the approval. And I know everyone wants, I promise we are like you. We do want to approve stuff as fast as possible, especially new studies. We do want to abide by that. So we really did want to provide the more specific questions to try to get those answers the first time, or as often as we can. We can't always eliminate that, but instead of going back two, three, four times, if we can just do that in one or two to get the answers that we need, then it would be a lot more efficient for everybody and a lot more time saving. Um, but what that does result in, there are a few places that there could be some sections or subsections that are larger than before. And there actually are more sections in this protocol than the previous version. So you might see that and go, wait a second, what type of used car salesman deal are they throwing here? I thought this was supposed to be shorter and easier. I don't like you guys anymore. But there is a sort of caveat to that with some of the other changes that were made. But those, we really did try to do that in order that even though there could be more questions in some places, not throughout the whole document, but in certain sections, that actually getting more specific information the first time is going to save time in the long run for the review process. And also, really, just doing the check boxes and skip patterns the way they are, we feel like that would be a time saver as well.
Oh,
So,
Zach, there's a question.
absolutely, sure.
If it is a secondary slash exempt analysis dealing with data from a previously approved slash completed study, do we need to provide consents, interventions, etc. from the original study again?
That is a good question. So, I would say in a large majority of the time, if you are getting, if you're sort of, this is a whole brand new study. You are using data from an already approved study. That study is going to stand on its own, and especially if the study is still open. If it's closed, um, and you have identifier or you're trying to get identifiable information, that could be one thing. But more likely than not, we're not going to need to see, consent information or that kind of stuff for a second when really the procedures of that study you're working on is only secondary data analysis. That's all we want to see with this protocol that you put in there. You can make references and it will be helpful to say this is from study 2000. We're using data from here and the consent procedures are from that. But we don't want you to copy and paste everything because then it's going to make us think that you're actually getting consent in this study, unless it's very clearly worded that way. So hopefully that answers the question.
It seems like it does from his response.
Good question though. Always good to bring that up because we don't want to reinvent the wheel whenever we do that enough as it is with the IRB. So when we can try to limit that, that's the hope. So a big piece of feedback that I'm sure maybe some of you have felt or thought, or I know that we've received, other offices have received for years, is that there's lots of studies that are considered not human subjects research or exempt research. And the old protocol was 32 sections long, and there's all of these questions that have to be completed, mostly no matter what. And it was arduous. It was time consuming. There were a lot of questions that had absolutely no relevance at all to the study or really to what the IRB needed to make that particular determination. There were certainly extra pieces of information in there. In almost all of those cases, that information was helpful for us to know, but it wasn't necessary for the IRB to go through our checklists and say, hey, we need this information for this study to meet exempt criteria or to know that it's not going to meet human subjects research criteria. So, but for years, so there was lots of requests to say, can we just have a protocol that's a shortened version or that only includes some questions? Or if it's not subjects research, can't we just submit something totally different and not have to go through all of this? Which ideally was a great thought. But one problem that we ran into fairly often was that we didn't want to create a standalone document for either of those reasons because what happens if, you complete the whole protocol, you've got all these questions, and we look at everything and we go, as the IRB, we say, you know what, this actually is human subjects research, and you completed this non-human subjects research protocol. or you completed an exempt protocol and it's actually expedited level because there's one detail of the study that rises above the level of exempt research. And we felt like that in that case we would have to tell people, okay, well you got to ditch that and now complete this other the big protocol all over again, and that would result in frustrations and delays along those lines. So we did recognize the need for something like that, and we, as part of the process to reshape and revise a new protocol template to keep that in mind, to how we can do that. So the new 503 protocol template does allow researchers to request an exempt or not human subjects research determination. So if you go through the document, there are 20 there after section 22, there is a stop point that you'll see at the bottom of the slide here, where you do not have to advance past that section and complete anything else if you are requesting an exempt or not human subjects research determination. You certainly can if you want to, but it is not necessary. The information behind that is not needed, and then you can submit that. It would be certainly helpful. If we see here, in the second comment in this slide right here says that you can add a comment within the click submission that states that you believe your study is not human subjects research or exempt, and that will help tip us off. But it is well within your rights to submit that document as it is, and it will know, hey, okay, you think your study is going to be exempt or not human subjects research, and we will go along with that and review the study to make sure that that is accurate and true. So really, you'll have to complete all the sections up there, up through section 22, and then you will see that point, and then you can stop there. So the good part about that is that if you submit, you believe your study is exempt, we reviewer looks at it and goes, you know what? Unfortunately, it actually is expedited, or it's greater than minimal risk, and you might need to go to the full board for a full board review. All you really then have to do, you don't have to start over, you don't have to do a whole new document, you don't need to start from scratch. All you have to do is complete the rest of the sections in the document as it is. Because then there's I believe 13 or 14 more sections that go on after that, that there is information that we need to get the whole picture of the study for expedited level research or up. So that way it's you don't have to that should be an overall time saver if that happens. I wouldn't expect that happens very often, but it certainly could happen with some studies that are right on the boundary between especially expedited and exempt level type research. And sort of, I touched on this with a one of the earlier slides of as just as an example. But if something that we asked for before, you may have noticed that for the people in here who do biomedical research, who do data analysis research, secondary data analysis, and perhaps you're getting data from another institution or from another source there where absolutely no identifiers are being sent to you, and you're probably going to be asking for a not human subjects research determination, that there's a prompt there with a paperclip that says please upload an HRP-613 certificate of de-identification to your study, and that's just a document that lists all of the identifiers, the HIPAA identifiers, and you sort of just check them off, and you could submit that to say yes, I confirm that no identifiable data will be collected or obtained from you as part of the study. So, real quick, well, before going into some of the specific new section highlights, maybe some new questions, are there any pressing questions anybody has, or any thoughts or concerns or feedback so far?
There's a question that says, if we haven't yet submitted our protocol yet for a new study, is it better for IRB to submit using the new template?
Yes, because actually we started once on January 6th, I believe is when it was first released. and we had sent out we try to set out as much guidance as possible and notifications that we were going to require the use of that for anything submitted after March 1st. So I would suggest now um, to do that. We have allowed in certain scenarios, maybe you've been working on something for months and months and months, and you have the almost the entire thing completed, and you can sort of send an email to us and ask us if it's okay to proceed for that way. But otherwise, if you're just getting going, we are requiring the new template to be used as of March 1st.
Um, the question is it already in the library?
It is. Yep. And I will everything. I believe that I might have a slide that addresses that too. But all the template and all the supplemental documents are available in the Click Library under the Templates tab. They are also available in the VPR. Some people use the VPR website as well. I know the website overall has overgone a little bit of an overhaul in the last year or so, but there is a toolkit, like a Huron toolkit website that shows all of the templates and all of the documents, like checklists, worksheet, things of that nature. That is also, um, and I can also send out an email with a link because I don't think I have the link to that as well. But that website is also updated. The IT department updated the link so that every place where that particular the old protocol linked to any website, it could be at departmental websites if people did that elsewhere. Whether it's in Click, the VPR website, or anywhere it could be linked to, it should be the new version of the protocol.
There's another question. What about the amendment? Do I use the new template for the amendment?
That is a good question, and I apologize because I don't think I actually addressed that in here. But this is only for new studies. So we are not requiring at continuing review or at modifications to start, maybe you just got it approved. It could be a study that's been approved for 8 years. We're not going to ask you to submit a new protocol on that because that would be a whole lot of work for something that's not going to in the long run, it's not going to advance anything. And by all means, if you wanted to do that, we would accept it. But we're not going to require that of anybody. Those ones are going to stay active, but um, eventually those studies will be closed out. We still have studies that go back to IRB-net that are still open. That don't even have the 503 template from 10 years ago here. So that way, it just limits the extra work that everybody has to do, and we're only going to focus on new studies going forward.
And then, will existing well, you kind of covered that, but will existing protocols need to be converted into this new template prior to modification or continuing review? But you just answered that.
Right, yeah. So yeah, no changes to that. Like if you already have one, like I know I had a study that was going to the full board that was submitted initially back in October or November and went back and forth a few times. It's still on the old template, but because there's been back and forth with it, where there's not going to be, it's possible you could be in that case where maybe you've been sitting on revisions for months at this point, but you've already at least submitted it once in the old template. We're not going to ask you to scrap everything and start over at that point.
And those are all the questions for right now.
Thank you, Marshall. Sounds good. Thanks for the questions, everybody. So now I'll go through here. I know it's already 10:35, so we do have some more. This part here is dealing with some of the. I think I mentioned this already. The new sections or new things to highlight with the changes to the new template. So right from the beginning, section 2.0 is study elements. This sort of replaces a section in the original protocol called study design, and not entirely, if you will, but we wanted to be able to sort of get a nice overall picture of what procedures, what is the crux of your study? What does your study involve? There could be the option that Many of these uh, details about your study could be included in it. Probably not all of it because that'd be quite the whopper of a study. But there are many options you can check, as many of them as what is relevant, and it is not it's not fully um, inclusive. For example, it does say there's, I believe, like data analysis in here, secondary data analysis, and that could be tricky because we do have the separate 503R protocol that for right now only retrospective medical chart reviews. So more likely than not, that certainly you could do a secondary data analysis of other types of data, but um, it's possible that you could also do a secondary data analysis with some other study procedure going on, such as surveys and interviews or focus groups. So, by all means, we have this to try to be as comprehensive as possible. But if not, there's another option to type in, and you could type in whatever options you need in the text box there.
Can I ask a quick question, Zach?
Sure.
So if your study is only a medical, like a retrospective chart review or only a secondary analysis of data, you'd recommend that we use the HRP 503R then. If
Yes,
that
that's
doesn't include
correct.
any other interventional or like prospective data collection, then you use that form.
Right. Like at this point, it's only for the retrospective medical chart reviews. We do want those on the 503R because all the questions are very specific to that. We do want to expand that to potentially include maybe secondary specimens as well, and potentially all secondary data analysis studies. We've talked about doing that because there could be other data analysis studies that aren't just retrospective medical chart reviews. So that's probably going to be our next project, is to update that a little bit to be a little bit more inclusive there. But we do think that it would be the best to do it for the 503R if that's the only thing that's going on. Because
Okay,
a lot of studies do have secondary data analysis, but there's also a whole other component where maybe you're consenting another group of participants.
sure.
So even the 503R itself will say right in there, only fill this out if this is the only procedure in your study. This is the only thing that you're doing. You're not getting consent. You're not having other study procedures. So thank you, Andrea, for bringing that up. But yeah, that is the right now. That's the only sort of situation where you would fill out the 503R.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. So one thing that has been a little bit more difficult in recent years is if your study involves an international component. So we do have a question right there right at the beginning in section two, because it will help tip us off, because now there's a lot more concern and oversight over research being done in other countries, whether it's conflict of interest reasons or data security, especially data security reasons. There's a lot more of a process that has to go on behind the scenes to get your study approved, such as like a UB legal review. And depending on the situation, there likely needs to be a review from some sort of ethics review or ethics board in another country. So if you have to check yes to this question, contact us right away, or if we see it, we will get the steps moving, because it definitely takes a lot more time to get those studies approved now than 5, 10 years ago, because of the additional concern about everything. So beforehand, there really wasn't a question that specifically asked that. Now we've got one right at the beginning of the protocol.
Zach, there's a new question.
Sure.
They asked for a clarification. If they're submitting a protocol for Trinetics data, would it be a 503R or other administrative patient data like insurance company data or state all hospital discharge data? I have been using the regular 503 form until now.
Okay, that is a good question. I mean, I know the Trinetics is supposed to be coming from from medical record data now, and I feel like that is a particular line that is we have not been as super specific about that to this point, because that technically sort of falls outside of the instructions do say retrospective medical chart review only, and technically You're not going into a medical chart to get the Trinetics data, but that's where all the data comes from initially, right? So pretty much all of the requirements are going to be the same. So as of now, to me, I would say it would be appropriate to use the 503R in those cases because that's still the only, as long as that's still the only study procedure that you're doing is getting secondary data, and it is tying back to a medical record. And that is sort of the hope with the 503R with what I was just mentioning before is that we want to sort of clearly expand it in some way so that it's more clear that it could include not just retrospective medical chart reviews. It will more clearly include things such as Trinetics or other databases that are similar to that, or educational records, or specimens that are being stored that have already been collected for another use as well. So I would say that it would be okay to submit the 503R for a Trinetics study at this point. And if you do get that, and what I would say is that you can always add a comment in the submission when you start and say, I was told that I could use this protocol for the time being, because really the only difference is that it's not you're not diving into the medical record itself, but all other details of that submission should still reflect that same type of study, because that's all you're doing as a secondary data analysis. But if you're doing anything else with that data, if there are somehow other study procedures that are beyond that, then you should submit the regular 503 protocol.
Hi, Zach. Sorry to I probably taking more time, but just another clarification there. So, our we've been using the Trinetics data and Sparks data from New York State. So, even for that, so what we do is like we try to combine the data with death record data, which also comes from Sparks, but some physician data, things like that. So, is it better to just submit the usual one and probably get a recommendation from IRB that probably this should be submitted from in 503R? Which way to go there?
I would say for now, if you're combining it with potentially other data from other sources and other places, it might be safest to do the regular 503 in that case,
Okay.
just to make sure, at least until we expand the 503R and sort of include maybe some extra questions about that, just to make sure that we get the full picture, especially if you're including data from other places. Um, but so I would say for now in that specific case, it would be best, yes, to just do the regular 503, but then look that in the future and so over so many months or a year down the line that you can shift that to the 503R. We would send out some guidance about that in advance of doing so.
Okay. Thank
You're welcome. Thank you for asking. Okay, so vulnerable populations, we sort of changed this section up a little bit as well. Um, this is sort of a little um, gateway into the supplemental documents part that I'll talk about at the very end of the presentation. But you can sort of see here that there's some information about there's a note about that vulnerable populations, the status must be known to the study team. So you could be doing a study where it doesn't matter at all if you know that there is a pregnant woman a pregnant woman as part of the study, because you will not know. The study procedures will not impact if someone is pregnant in any way, and you'll never find that out. So if that's the case, you do not have to check pregnant women here. That's just as an example. So the note is supposed to help to provide some more information about that. And then if you actually are enrolling any of these vulnerable populations, you are directed to submit a supplemental document as part of your submission, which I will talk about later. So the there's no any extra questions about each specific population in this section. It would be in a whole different document to deal with. So if you are not enrolling any vulnerable populations, pretty much the only thing you need to know is that you would check the "We are not enrolling vulnerable populations" box, and you skip to the next question and then go from there. So you don't have to see all these questions upon questions and sections that are not relevant to to your study. One that's a little trickier, it's within the same section that we don't get all that often, but we still wanted to highlight is what's called potentially vulnerable populations. They don't meet sort of the governmental regulatory requirements for additional protections in all cases, but some good examples there are students or employees, where just because someone is a student doesn't mean that they are at risk for 100% of the studies out there, and they need to have extra protections for being a student. But if there is a student and the study is being run by the PI who is the teacher of their class, then there could be potential risks and vulnerability there for the participant if they choose to participate in the study. So we tried to provide some information here as to when to check those boxes and what safeguards should be put in place throughout the study if those vulnerable populations are going to be enrolled in that case. But it doesn't happen really all that much, but we wanted to highlight that because there really wasn't a question that clearly and specifically dealt with that in the last protocol. There was one question that touched on a little bit, but we didn't feel like it was as clear and we didn't get as much information as we could otherwise. So that's why we expanded upon it here. Another, I've already shown this section as an example, study interventions. We separated out two different questions now about 9.1 is a non-drug or device intervention. It could be a physical intervention, it could be a behavioral intervention, educational, or maybe a benign intervention where something as simple as, introducing a stimulus, such as like, hey, here's this video that I want you to watch for 5 minutes, and then we're going to see how you respond to it. So certain exempt studies or low risk studies could have those types of interventions as well. So we tried to be a little bit more clear in separating out the intervention questions because before it seemed to read a little bit more like the interventions was more specific for drug and devices only. So we split those up so that we have a non-drug device interventions question and then a drug and device intervention question, which also subsequently has its own supplemental document. Probably the biggest change, or one of the bigger changes, and if you remember back a little while ago when I was talking about having more specific questions and expanding on vague questions and trying to reduce overall review time, was really with the confidentiality of data and specimens sections. And here it's section 17 and 18. Because previously, sort of the very first question in that section was, describe how you are protecting the confidentiality of of individuals. And really, when it comes down to it, in most no greater than minimal risk studies, the primary and or only risk is a risk of breach of confidentiality. So we would get information there, but almost every single time we would have to ask additional questions about the confidentiality of how data was being protected, where was it being stored, how long was it being stored, what coding mechanisms were taking place to separate identifiers from the rest of the data. So what we did is that was the one section we expanded out the most to ask those questions individually, so that if we can get those questions and the answers from you guys right from the start, then maybe there'll be more times where approval can be granted the first time you submit, or at least only require minor revisions otherwise, and potentially not as much back and forth and confusion about what we're looking for in those sections. Right toward the beginning of that section, the next slide will actually show a picture of part of it because it was too big to fit on one slide. It's a chart that you'll be familiar with if you've seen the 503R, and we still even adjusted it from there to show the list of what is considered an identifier from HIPAA and where is it being recorded and where is it being recorded, or why or how is it being recorded. So if you see here on section 17.2, we have a note where we have a reference to one of our tip sheets about de-identified or coded or limited data sets that's in our click library. But here there's a chart that shows the list of all the potential identifiers, and then are you recording or collecting or obtaining that information or not? And if so, where is it going to be? So you could be having the identifier on a code key, which is a document that only includes identifying information in the study ID, which is supposed to be kept separate from the rest of the data to reduce that confidentiality risk. You could be collecting it on the data collection form, which is allowed in certain of the identifiers are permitted to do that. It's what's called limited identifiers, where it's a little bit more difficult to actually identify somebody from that information. So there are certain cases where it is permissible to have an identifier on the data collection form. And there's a question later on in that section that asks why you were doing that and how, and what is the rationale for doing that. You could be collecting data for a recruitment or administrative purpose only. So maybe you're collecting it as part of, you're getting someone's name or phone number just so that you can contact them. But then as soon as you contact them, you're deleting it and you're not storing it. So that way there's a lot less, rationale, or we don't have to, grill you on those kinds of, on that question, where that's being stored if it's not going to be stored for very long. And then there's another part that we added on here that's a little bit harder to explain, but, if you are doing a recording, an audio recording or a video recording is identifiable just inherently, because you can't, unless you are able to sort of blur someone's face or distort audio. If you are keeping that kind of data at all, that's just an identifiable and you can't really get around that. So there's other questions that deal with that towards the bottom. And in that way, there will be ways to describe how that data is being kept or protected later in that section. And that's something that I feel like we could probably do a whole presentation on the confidentiality section alone. So I'm happy to answer any questions about this potentially later or via email, because I know we're running low on time here. But this section overall was, I think, the biggest expansion and the biggest difference to what the last protocol was like, in order to really help out with efficiency. Another one is the consent process. We added a few more questions here to be more specific about what is going on with consent, a few more notes, a few more educational tidbits in there, and things that are done in order to satisfy approval criteria that may not have been as clear before. We may have had to get more information, more back and forth from researchers in this section. And right at the beginning of section 21.1, if you answer no because you're not getting consent as part of the study, you can skip the rest of 21 entirely, because there are 7 or 8 subsections there. Sort of a good thing here is you see in 21.1 there's a little note that says this does not refer to consent documentation, but rather whether you will be obtaining permission for subjects to participate in a research study, because the definitions of documentation of consent and waiver of consent and alteration of consent can sometimes be confusing and gets mixed up. So we try to add a few more notes here to eliminate potentially sort of incorrect responses to these sections from the get-go. Before another change we made, this is after the exempt non-human subjects research cutoff, so we're not always going to be asking this. If you have an exempt research study or a non-human subjects research study, is the staff resources and qualifications. There's always a lot of back and forth on this one, because who knows what needs to be included in there about what is someone's qualifications to be part of the study. And one thing, we actually made a little chart here so that you can add a role or someone's name and then their education or experience or the time and effort, because in some cases there were different questions in the old protocol as opposed to just one chart that shows everything here. So one thing that we do want to note, and a lot of you probably know this, is that if you do put a name in here and then that person leaves the study, one thing is just because it wouldn't be accurate anymore if they were no longer part of the study, is that we often ask that you have to update this document every time that there's a like a change where someone gets removed. So we do strongly suggest just adding roles in general and general descriptions in this case. Otherwise, you might have to do a lot more modifications in the future to your study. One thing I did want to point out is that we have separate, more clear definitions and sections for waiver or alteration of documentation of consent. And we put them at the very end of the protocol template, sections 35 to 37. And the reason for that is that um, uh, there's a lot of studies where you may need to waive consent. You may need to alter the elements of consent, which means that you may not be telling everyone the true purpose of the study for a reason, because you can't bias the results. That's what it's sort of what an alteration of the consent process is. And documentation of consent is actually obtaining a signature, either a written signature or an official digital signature. Now, all of those could theoretically happen for an exempt study or a not human research study, but we have certain requirements and there are certain governmental requirements for expedited and greater than minimal risk level research studies in order to issue a waiver, in order to issue an alteration or a waiver of written documentation of consent to allow uh, not using a signature for the study. But those requirements don't exist for exempt research or for not human subjects level research. So we move that to the very end because even though your studies that are exempt or not human subjects research may involve these questions, they're pretty unnecessary. They're not necessary. We don't need to know the specific requirements if your study doesn't meet exempt criteria or a higher level. So in that case, you can just ignore this question and you don't have to fill out supplemental documents for exempt studies where you're just getting a survey responses, for example, and you're not getting an official signature. You don't even have to worry about this section. Whereas before, you might have been prompted to answer this question just because it was there and technically you were not getting a signature on the consent form. So the last few slides, I know we're running out of time, involves the supplemental documents, and this is sort of the biggest process change. And I did touch on this earlier. And we did this because there's lots of sections in the protocol that maybe are longer. They involve more questions, more detail. But if your study doesn't involve those procedures, if they don't involve those populations, if they don't involve those actions, you could be reading and going through and just going through section pages of information that aren't relevant to you. And that could be inefficient, it could be frustrating, it could be time consuming. So what we did with several of those sections is we took those out and made them separate supplemental documents. So the main protocol might say yes or no. It's if your study involves these particular procedures or these particular populations or situations. And if you check no, you just move on to the next section and you never have to see anything. But if you do check yes, there will be an extra document for you to complete and upload in the same place as your protocol section that just deals with that particular section. So the point of this is that for the greater majority of studies that don't include any of these, it will save a lot of time in completing the protocol document. And it really won't be that much extra time for researchers to complete these. And there might be certain situations where you'll know and you might be able to sort of save versions of those documents for yourself for use in future and other studies. So the list of the supplemental documents, and these are also all available in the Click library under the Templates tab as well, and also in the VPR website. There is the Drug and Device Supplement, and I put here what protocol section it goes with. Multi-site supplement, so if your study involves actual research in multiple, not just like locations like UB and like Amherst and Williamsville and Orchard Park, but UB and University of Michigan, University of Pittsburgh, University of California, that kind of research. A non-English speaking supplement for if you are going to enroll non-English speaking individuals. If you're going to bank data and specimens for future use, this is more common now because it needs to line up with requirements in the consent form for expedited level studies. Um, if you want to use data for future use beyond the scope of the current project, you need to complete that supplement. If you're a waiver or alteration of consent supplement, as I just mentioned in the last slide, and vulnerable populations. So, like I said, mentioned before, all the documents are available in the Click library under the Templates tab. But the best place to put these supplemental documents is the same place where you put the protocol, which is on the basic information page um, of the Click submission. I didn't want to put the number because it changes depending on what your answers are to that section. But it's the attached to protocol section, which will be the last one. So you can see here somebody uploaded their 503, but also a 513 and a 512. So the last, I know we're right at the end here. The last, just couple notes for everybody. We did first release this on January 6th, but we did make a few updates based off of initial feedback right away. The most current version is dated January 26th, 2026, and you'll see that in the footer of the document. So something that we always recommend, but it doesn't always get put out there, is to every time you're going to start a new protocol, to go to the Click library or the website and download a blank version from there, because that way you will ensure that you have the most latest up to date version of the protocol. Um, and like we're not planning on making any updates in the near future because we just released it. We don't want to be changing it all the time and lead to frustration and confusion with that. So we may look at it on a yearly basis and make updates at that point, but we still recommend that, and that's the case for any document in the Click library, that if you're going to use it, that we recommend every time, for every new version, every new study you're going to do, to go into that Click library and or the website and download a new copy. Um, Please continue to use the 503R for retrospective medical chart review studies. I know we brought up a little bit about that earlier. We do hope to expand that to all secondary data analysis studies in the near future. The HRP 508 site protocol document is for studies where you that we have less and less of them now, but where there's maybe an overall sponsored protocol or perhaps a master protocol for like a multi-site study, and UB is a site. So maybe there's a 50-page master protocol document, but not any specifics about what's happening here at UB. So you can upload both the master protocol and the 508 site protocol for those situations. And if you are a study where it is other sites are relying on the University of Buffalo IRB, so let's say you have a study going on here and also at the University of Virginia Tech, that you can do the main protocol for UB at the beginning. Then whenever you would submit a modification to add Virginia Tech as a site that will be enrolling participants in the study, you would have to submit a 508 for the specific procedures that may be different at Virginia Tech as opposed to the whole study at UB. And the 508 still looks like the old version of the protocol, but so that's another project on our in our timeline, is to update that to have it be more similar and look a lot more like the new 503. And a couple other things that people brought up is as good reminders is that we are requiring this as of March 1st, um, uh, because we released it on January 6th, but we are not going to require the use of it for modifications and continuing reviews or modifications. You definitely do not need to submit or create a whole new protocol for those kinds of studies. Just if you're changing the amount of people in your study from 100 to 120, you don't need to go back and redo the whole protocol in the new template. So if you've already got an active study that's already been approved, do not change it to the new version. I know I could probably talk for another hour and yammer on more and more and go on, but I know we're already a little bit past 11, so thank you all for your patience and for your attention. But any final questions that anybody has for now?
Not seeing any in the chat, and I don't see any hand raised, just a lot of thank yous.
Absolutely. And also, too, the last slide here, I know Marshall said the presentation will be available in the future. I know a couple people who said they couldn't make it because there were, clinics or rounds or things going on or, classes. This will be hopefully be helpful. I wanted to have additional guidance forthcoming as well. A few other potential helpful documents. So I'm working on something that's going to kind of go through each section, which just some special tips or questions in sections where it's relevant. But Val, many of you have probably talked to Val. I think Val is here. Hi, Val. Her phone number is here. You can always call her, or you can also call me, and my contact information is here. I'm always happy to answer any questions, help in any possible way that I can with any questions that you have about this or the IRB submission process or your study as a whole. And Alexis and Marshall's contact information is here also.
All right. Well, with that, we'll say thank you. Thank you, Zach. Valerie asked you to stay on. But everyone else, thank you for coming and have a good day.
Thank you, everyone, for your attention and listening for this and if you're interested in the topic. And hope to talk to you all soon. Thank you.